8 years ago, at a party to announce their engagement, former attorney Mark Folkley presented his fiancée Mildred with a prenuptial agreement, which stated that Mildred could only garden the backyard while he had control of the front. Although it was intended as a joke, the couple found that dividing up the territory diffused any arguments about what to plant where. Mark is responsible for the front yard, where he has planted evergreen screens, created paths and patios, and filled it with lush, natural woodland plantings. Mildred took the plain, small backyard and terraced it, built a stone wall, placed boulders in strategic spots, put in a water feature, and filled the garden with sun-loving plants. Although they've divided the garden between them, Mildred and Mark do all their gardening projects together. Mildred, we're here in Gainesville, Georgia, which I guess is really not that far from Atlanta. We're really right outside Atlanta.
We are. It's just 50 miles from Atlanta. Although it's interesting, we find particularly in the spring that things bloom sometimes 10 days later than they do in Atlanta, which is kind of interesting.
So you have your own microclimate. You can...
That's right, we do.
And this wonderful water feature here with the rocks all surrounding it, it looks like a big basin.
It's actually, I think they call it a wok. I guess it's modeled after woks, although it'd take a lot of food to fill that up.
Yeah.
But it's really a nice relaxing sound and certainly drowns out some of the leaf blowers in the neighborhood. And it's just very relaxing and calming.
And this is kind of fun because the plants are not sitting in water per se, but they're growing up among the rocks.
Right, they appreciate the splashing water that they get and they like the moisture, but as you say, they're not sitting in water, so they're in containers that do drain. And the ferns particularly appreciate the extra water since they're out here in full sun.
Well, that's a good idea. Because they're in full sun, the water makes them able to
That's right.
tolerate that.
They're cinnamon ferns that are very adaptable fern, but they do appreciate the extra water that they get here. I was introduced to gardening by my grandmother. She took care of me when I was little. My mom was a school teacher, and so I spent the days with my grandmother, who was an avid gardener. And I think my earliest memory is helping my grandmother water her pansies. And to this day, pansies are still one of my favorite flowers.
Mildred, you've got this great wall here. I don't know, I guess the terrain was such that you built
Right, we
the wall.
had to build a wall to hold the soil back. Previously, the garden just sloped sort of straight down, and it was very difficult to garden. And having the two different levels makes it easier.
Well, and it's great for viewing plants above the wall, in the wall, and then it gives you this great area with the gravel. Now tell me about the gravel and how you decided to gravel garden.
It was really an experiment. I had seen it in a lot of books that I had been reading. And I wanted to do a couple of things. First of all, I like to have plants that I can cut and take inside. And I wanted to have obviously a very free-form garden, I guess. And the gravel lets things seed around, and you get a very irregular pattern with things as you let them seed, as you can see with the Chinese forget-me-not.
That color is so beautiful.
It is. It's a wonderful spring, bright blue color. I collected the seed of this on a seed collecting trip in China in 1996.
Wow.
And it does reseed, obviously, and it reblooms in the fall also, which is nice. To have that blue color in the fall is very unusual.
And is that a hardy perennial, or is it a biennial, or?
I guess technically it's probably either a biennial or a reseeding annual, depending on how it behaves. But for us, I just call it a reseeding annual, really.
So you just, after it finishes blooming in the spring, you eventually cut it off and the seeds just come up?
Right, they come up the next spring. And then the plants that are here blooming now usually will rebloom in the fall, and then they'll die out, but you've got seedlings already coming up that will bloom the following spring.
And this is full sun.
It is full, hot sun, and they respond to it. In fact, in China, it was growing just in a big, wide open field.
That would have been exciting to actually get the seed of a plant in China, bring it back, and then I guess you propagated it at the Botanical Garden?
Right, we grew it at the Botanical Garden, and I got some of the extras, and have several plants around the garden that we actually collected in China. And it's fun to see them grow and change over the years and resemble what they were in China.
Wow. Sinoglossum. What a great name.
I know.
Mark's first project was a patio that's become the centerpiece for the front yard. See what Mildred calls the island at the center of the universe when we return.
It's a whole lot.
Mildred and Mark Folkley came to gardening from opposite directions. Mildred took the direct route, studying biology and learning from some inspiring gardening mentors before settling in at the Atlanta Botanical Garden. Mark took a more indirect route by starting his career as a lawyer. When he realized that he enjoyed gardening more than his work, he gave up law, educated himself in gardening, and started his own successful landscaping business. It was only a matter of time before two such avid gardeners would find each other.
I met Mark at what used to be the Atlanta Flower Show, now is the Southeastern Flower Show. The Botanical Garden was doing a garden near his, and we actually borrowed some equipment from his crew.
And then we actually worked on a project together, and got to know each other a little bit better then.
And we have a great time gardening together. I think it's just a lot of fun.
When Mildred agreed to marry me, we had an engagement party, and I had drawn up a prenuptial agreement.
The idea was that he had the front yard and I had the back, but we actually gardened the whole garden together.
Mark, how large is your property?
Well, it's about an acre. The house is just jammed at the back of the lot, so we have a real small backyard and ended up with a large front yard.
And this patio here, is this one of the first things you did, or it seems like a focal point?
After we finished clearing the vines and bamboo and so forth, we started in here, laid out the patio, the pond, and the wall. I just wasn't really aware of what a beautiful lot it was and what its potential was, mainly because it was just full of honeysuckle. We had a lot of kudzu out there in the front as well. Turns out, once we eliminated all that of course we have a good terrain, a lot of elevation change in the front yard, and we have assets there that we didn't really recognize.
The trees having such a high canopy gives you a very spacious feeling.
We've climbed, I guess, all of these trees, and we've limbed them up 30, 40 feet, some of them 60 feet. With more light here on the ground level, we have more
diversity
opportunity
of what you can grow.
For plant selection, right.
And this island in the center of your pond, that's a different type of treatment. I don't often see that, and using the royal fern, creating a forest.
The root systems of the ferns are actually in the water. There is a group of concrete blocks underneath the island, and then there are 2 or 3 plastic tubs, maybe 6 or 8 inches deep, just sitting on top of the blocks.
What does Mildred call that?
Mildred calls it the island at the center of the universe.
So this is the center of your garden?
It is. This is the center of our universe.
So you've got about an acre here, and how did you lay out the paths?
We used surveyor's flags and laid out some paths that way. There are a lot of things to think about when you lay out a path, because the path creates the shape of the beds on either side. It creates the view into that area and the view out of that area. That decision about where to locate a path is affecting a lot of things.
And you've had how many years to be working on all these paths?
Oh, we've been fiddling here with this for about 14 years now. Another one of the first things that we undertook was to try to enclose the front yard without it necessarily appearing as if we were trying to do that. So we used a mix of evergreens to accomplish that, some hemlocks, some Cryptomeria japonica. You usually see those in the sun, but they will go into shade. The luster leaf holly is another important component of the evergreen screen in the front. We did add some magnolia as well, Magnolia grandiflora, along with some things of a smaller stature like the leucothoe, rhododendron, and things of that kind.
In a large garden like this, you need plants that will really do their job, and you've selected some beautiful examples of perennials for ground covers.
Well, one of the things that we're looking for is a plant that will set a lot of seed and then reproduce and come up here and there. A good example of that is the Helleborus or Lenten rose. They come up here and there and help cover the territory. They flower well in this setting too, and they have good evergreen foliage.
So where you might find it an asset for a plant to be a good spreader, Mildred has a tendency to like specimens of things.
Right, she's more likely to want one of something, and one of something that's going to stay put.
In a garden this large, though, there's room for both of you to have specimen plants and wonderful weavers like the hardy begonia and the hellebores.
Right, well, you really need both. You don't want a chorus of soloists. You have to have a soloist here and there and a chorus in the background.
Well put.
Mildred's job at the Atlanta Botanical Gardens gives her the opportunity to bring home some unusual plants, like the Asian version of the native Amsonia, when we continue.
You want them, and DIY Network's got them.
This Old House on DIY.
The biggest experts in home improvement together in one place. This Old House.
Our project is really turning a corner today.
New Yankee Workshop.
I can show you a couple things.
And Bob Vila's Home Again.
It's good to have you home again.
Watch This Old House beginning every night at 7 on DIY Network. The Deans of Do-It-Yourself on the home of home improvement.
Like the plant explorers from over 100 years ago, Mildred enjoys visiting exotic countries and bringing back seeds to try out in her Gainesville, Georgia garden. And as one of the perks of her job, she often brings home unusual plants and finds the perfect spot for them to thrive in the garden. Mildred, you have such, it's not surprising, the fact that you're a horticulturist and work at the Atlanta Botanical Garden, but you've got such a diverse collection of plants in this gravelly area, from conifers to the herbaceous plants and then shrubs like this sarissa, which has been around a long time, but I love it in combination with this beautiful blue flower, which I don't know.
The blue flower is Rasia, which is the Asian counterpart to our native Amsonia, which is a wonderful blue flowering perennial also. And if you look at the flowers closely, you see they have those same blue star-shaped flowers.
Yep.
And the sarissa, you're right, has been around a long time, but it's just such a good, tough plant. Flowers for a long period, very drought tolerant, and a very fine texture, which I think combines nicely with the Rasia. I was an undergraduate biology major in college, but worked in the college greenhouses and had a professor who actually suggested that I do an internship at the Atlanta Botanical Garden, and was encouraged by Ann Crammon, who was the director at that time, to go to graduate school and major in horticulture, which I did, and went to the University of Georgia, and Mike Durr was my major professor, and he's just such a wonderful professor and so enthusiastic. And then spent a year in England on a Garden Club of America fellowship and worked at Kew and Wisley in Edinburgh, and then came back, and there was fortunately a job open at the Atlanta Botanical Garden, and I've been there for 15 years. So I've been really fortunate in my career.
This cotoneaster over your wall is just like a drapery, almost a curtain of cotoneaster.
It is. It's done wonderfully well here in this tough, hot, dry situation. And it's interesting, this was grown from seed from our trip to China, and it's done really well here. It's about 5 years old from seed, which is pretty good.
I was going to ask you that. In 5 years, you can get a plant this mature.
Right, and we've actually had to prune this back. It's covered up some of the plants coming out of the wall, and it's growing down over the gravel here now.
And what is the species on this?
It's a Cotoneaster microphyllus, which is a little-leaved cotoneaster, and has these wonderful white flowers in the spring, and it gets beautiful red fruits in the fall also.
I see a few of them.
Yeah, there are a few left
clinging
over.
from last fall.
Right, still bright red.
Cotoneasters can have some problems in the south. And now Gainesville Zone 7?
Gainesville Zone 7, just like Atlanta. But this one has been very tough, fire blight resistant, and no spider mites, which is one of the other problems that we can get in the south with cotoneasters. But it's been great so far.
And evergreen and beautiful. Even though you're using it as drapery, it also works for an espalier.
It does, and it also works as a ground cover as well. So it's a multi-purpose plant for a tough, tough site. Gardening in a wall is pretty easy. There are just a couple of things to remember. One, you want to make sure that you have soil behind the wall for the roots to grow into. And usually I start with very small plants, say a 4-inch plant. and place it in the wall and put some extra soil around the root ball so that there's no air exposure to the roots. And then one thing I found that helps the plant get established is to take sphagnum moss and place it around the plant, and it helps hold moisture in the wall and around that root ball as you're trying to get it established and to grow back into the soil behind the wall. So that's just a little tip.
You've got a dry stack wall that you've planted in all along the back here, and then as we turn the corner, you've got these wonderful boulders that are placed strategically on the hill.
That's right. Mark placed these, and I did a wonderful job. They're beautiful rocks, and it's a nice way to sort of casually and more informally end the slope back here and create some great planting pockets in and amongst the rocks.
So Mark is a rock person.
That's right. We call him Rock Boy.
And you've got hardy geraniums and columbine and that tiarella that has just spread around like a sea.
That's right. It's the running form of tiarella, which actually is made a ground cover here. And geranium macrorhizum, such a great perennial. And that's just one plant that makes that big clump. And then we let the blue columbine seed around. This is one of my favorite geraniums, Geranium phaeum.
Those flowers, that color on the flowers is so pretty. It's so dark.
It is. It's such an intense color. And it's a great geranium for partly shaded areas. And there are white cultivars and lavender cultivars, just a great plant. As you can see, it seeds around.
And the foliage, does that hold up as the season progresses?
It does. Actually, you just cut the plant back to the ground. It has the same foliage throughout the rest of the growing season. And often it will rebloom for us early in the summer too, which is nice.
An unattractive feature of the property can become an asset with some imagination and a lot of hard work. See how Mark transforms the neighborhood drainage ditch into a dry creek bed when we continue.
While Mildred Folkley has spent most of her adult life as a professional gardener, her husband Mark was a late bloomer. His father was a gardener, and Mark grew up helping him in the yard. But although Mark pursued a career as a lawyer, he never lost his love of gardening.
Well, I practiced law for 10 years, and I decided I wanted to do something else. And as I was looking around for something else, I just reflected on the fact that when I wasn't at work, I was in my garden. And I'd be outside in the morning on Saturday at 6 o'clock, waiting on it to get light. And I thought to myself, well, this is something I really enjoy. And that's why I decided to make that change.
Mark, this is a dry stream bed that looks very natural here, and I'm sure is functional.
Well, it is. There's a 20-foot wide storm drainage easement that runs right through the middle of the lot. So this was just a ditch, and we tried to make a virtue of necessity by turning it into a dry stream bed. It carries quite a lot of water during a rain, sometimes 10 or 12 inches of water.
Wow. So that it dramatically changes when there's a lot of rain.
Oh, yeah.
And how does that affect your plant selection on the embankments?
We've introduced plants that, in fact, do better in this kind of setting, like the clethra here, which likes to be in real moist conditions. The pawpaw, you see that along stream banks as well. This is a plant Mildred ordered for me. It's an Aurelia alata variegata. I've always liked the native Aurelia that we have here, but that grows so naturally. Here you often see it on the roadsides. This is a more well-behaved plant, and obviously it has the advantage of the variegation. It holds this variegation very well right through the summer.
So it takes our tough southern summers and that heat, and it doesn't seem to bother it?
Not at all. No, it's very much at home.
This is a great little grouping here with this carex, variegated carex, and this little, looks almost like a strawberry begonia.
It is in the same genus. This is Saxifraga vechiana. It's a good little ground cover for shady conditions, and also it's unusual in that it does real well in soggy conditions. It's spread a lot here. We've moved it around the garden, but it doesn't spread so much that it's hard to control.
And it flowers.
It flowers.
So you get an added benefit. Even when it's not flowering, it's got that handsome foliage. So that's a little Saxifraga vechiana.
Right.
Charming plant.
The only reason to garden is because it's fun. making decisions about what it'll look like and how you'll get there, and then the physical part of getting it done, and then the fun of watching it grow.
I guess your vocation and your avocation merge together. I don't know a gardener who's a professional and doesn't garden at home.